And welcome to Cartoon Brew's live stream. It's Friday, April 25th. My name's Amit. I'm the publisher of Cartoon Brew, and I'm joined by Cole Delaney.
Thank you. I actually don't need to say anything then.
Well, I'm in LA. Ireland. I'm in LA. Cole's in Dublin.
Dublin and Ireland, yeah.
Yeah. And
it is actually the 25th of April here as well. We're on the same day. I don't know why I felt the need to point it out, but that's where we are. Yeah.
So we're going to jump right into it. We have a really special guest today. It's an animation legend. It's Bill Kroyer. And if you don't know the name, you certainly know his work, but chances are with our readership, a lot of people know his name as well. Bill just wrote an wonderful new book. It's called Mr. In Between: My Life in the Middle of the Animation Revolution. And we're going to bring him on soon. But first, I want to talk a little bit about. Oh, there he is, but we're not going to bring him on yet.
Hi, Bill. Thanks for joining us.
No. Before we bring him on, I wanted to read his biography a little bit. Bill Kroyer is an American director of animated CG commercials, films, and title sequences. He began his career in 1975 in the animation industry, and he soon moved to Disney, where he was working in the animation department there. There he met director Steven Lisberger, who was working on Animal Olympics, with whom he would collaborate on Tron. And thereafter, Bill decided to pursue computer animation instead of traditional animation, while Robert Abel and Associates and digital productions. Later on, he started Kroyer Films, where he directed Fern Gully and did a number of iconic title sequences like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, Troop Beverly Hills, and National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. And this little biography does not mention his long career at Rhythm and Hughes, but he's had a absolutely fascinating career. Oscar nominated for the short film Technological Threat. We're just gonna we're gonna get into all of this. So let's bring him on. How do we do that? There we go. Welcome, Bill. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks, guys. Good to see you.
Yeah. Thank you for being here. Yeah, you know, this book, I kind of read your little biography. I don't know if you heard that or not, but I kind of read a little bit there. I'm familiar with the broad strokes of your career, but this book that you've written is a complete revelation to me in terms of, you know, how interesting your career has been in the animation industry. It's quite fascinating. You've been there kind of for this transitional period in animation that very few people have been as involved in it as you. With maybe John Lasseter and yourself. You know, you've been there for this very interesting period in animation history. But I guess one of the things that struck me about the book was that it wasn't necessarily planned. Like I don't think, it seems like a lot of things just happened, but it wasn't a conscious, like, I'm going to move into computer animation. It seemed like you wanted to work as a 2D animator. I'm curious, what was it that when did you decide like computers were like maybe something that you should look into? Because most of the people at Disney at the time, your colleagues, Henry Selick and John Musker, they were committed to the 2D animation side, and you made a decision fairly early on that you were going to move into this other direction. Was it just happenstance, or was it a conscious? Did you see something that others didn't see that early?
Oh no, I was forced into it. It wasn't like I made I'm going to go out. First of all, it's funny how you're asking this question and putting it this way, because when I started my career, of course, I was doing 2D because that's all there was. There was
Mm-hmm.
no character animation by computer that was even possible. Uh, and then when I went to work for Steve Lisberger, I was still doing 2D because he attracted me there with the Animal Olympics project, which was a very, very fun project because it was very loose, cartoony Warner Brothers type animation. And a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people weren't doing full animation like that at that time in 2D. Well, 2D was all there was, but, television was going and then Disney was going. But as far as doing funny shorts like the Animal Olympics stuff, nobody was doing it. So I went with Steve, and then Steve had this brilliant idea to do the movie Tron. He brought me back to Disney as his animation supervisor on Tron, no matter what it was going to be. As you might read from my book, originally he actually thought it would be the Tron character would be hand drawn, but then done with backlit codoliths, so they look like glowing lines. And the original animation tests we did for Tron were exactly that. But it became clear that that was not going to work because glowing lines would not give you a subtlety of performance that he wanted in the characters. Eventually, as you know, the character part of Tron went with live action actors who were then
Mm-hmm.
colorized. But the computer animation parts of Tron only came about because it was exactly at that moment when the technology started to be just barely capable of doing it. And when I often say that there's that phrase, you jump off a cliff and you build your wings on the way down. Tron is
Mm-hmm.
the absolute perfect example of that because when we started the movie we sold to Disney, we could not have made at that time. This technology didn't exist. Over the next 2 years, we worked with those four main suppliers, Magi, Triple I, Robert Abel, and Digital Productions in New York, to literally co-create and manipulate whatever they could do to make a movie that looked like it was a computer animated movie. And it was not just an artistic and storytelling process, but it was a symbiotic technological process because you have to realize the limitations of each of those companies were extreme. They could only do so much. So we literally
Mm-hmm.
crafted the creative concepts to match the limited capabilities of the technology. And then we worked together to milk them to get something on the screen that looked like it was intentional and was created to fit the story. So if you ask the question, how did I choose to go? I was thrust into it because I was asked by Steve to be the animation director on a movie that was now going to involve computers that had never done before. And I had to deal with it. And that's how I did it. And I loved it.
But yeah, I mean, and you're underselling yourself though, because you have to be. Not every 2D animator at Disney could have done what you did, right? Were you technically minded in
Well,
that sense, or
they could have done it, but they didn't want to do it. I mean,
okay,
literally,
Yeah.
the only guy that showed any kind of interest was Jerry Reese. We pitched all these guys, why don't you, Musker and everybody, why don't you come over and at least board the movie with us? No, I don't want to do it. But Jerry, Jerry, if you look at his subsequent career, has been nonstop technological innovation. I mean, he's probably the most innovative guy that's ever worked for the Disney theme parks. So Jerry, from the beginning, had that sense that there's something interesting here. There's something that's going to be, fun to do. And together we just figured it all out. But you're right
Mm-hmm.
about the fact that you have to have not only a willingness and an interest, but you do need to have a certain level of technical proficiency to work with a computer, especially in those days. You had to have no fear of numbers and no fear of mathematics, and you had to be able to do this weird conversion of taking what in your entire training as a 2D animator had been a purely visual analog image creation process and translate it into something that was absolutely divergent from that numbers. And that was thankfully I had the ability to do that. I had the ability to make very quick and very accurate kind of calculations about how to translate the pictures we were showing people into the numbers that would end up producing those pictures.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to continue on this thread, but I think one of the reasons it's so interesting to have you as a guest at this moment in animation is because we're kind of going through another transitional moment where we have this technology, AI that most artists right now absolutely despise. No animator wants to work in AI, but we can see it coming where, 10, 15 years from now, it may play a role in animation production. And people who adopt it right now could potentially have a very, long career in this new era where AI is combined with CG and hand drawn animation. But I feel like this is the first transitional moment that we're having since the 80s when you were there for that revolution between hand drawn and CG. So I don't know if you feel the same way or you see it the same way, but I feel like we're at this kind of critical juncture again in animation.
Yeah, I think the similarities and the parallels are obvious and they're legitimate. And I think that's why I think my book would be interesting for people because if anybody, I kind of realized as I started writing this, I happened to be kind of the guy who went through this from the very, very, very beginning as not only a lover of 2D, but a guy who could do 2D. There's my animation desk behind me. I can actually,
Mhm.
I loved it. And then I was kind of between forced and fascinated to make a complete transition. And along the way, through all the decades, constantly be handed new tools. Constantly,
Mm.
Rhythm and Hughes, my 10 years there, just think of all the things that we had to develop in house because the other thing you have to remember is that this off the shelf software business that everybody's used to now, that took a while to happen. When I
Mhm.
was in it, even when you go to, we were writing our own fur programs and our own water programs and everything. And even the Rhythm and Hughes animation software, Voodoo, was unique to that company. So my entire life has been having people throw brand new, innovative computer tools at me. And the question
Mm.
is, where does it begin and where does it end? Where does the technology take over? When are you cheating? Are you letting the computer do too much? And the only two things that I can tell you have never changed is that I don't believe any technology is inherently evil or inherently bad. I think any tool that comes along has to just be looked at and evaluated. And in the end of the day, any tool, including AI, is
Mm.
going to improve you just like the first time we invented a way to interpolate in betweens. It's going to be something that the artist has to decide how to use, and the artist has
Mm.
to be and implement it the way they are. I I guess the fear of AI, of course, is that it does do too much, and it can do so much to the point where you're going to feel like the artist doesn't have to really train anymore or learn the skills or learn the craft as much because AI will carry the load. And I think that's probably true. But I was just talking to some animators the other day who were, to me, they were sensing the fact that that's the reason that hand drawing in 2D is starting to make a comeback
Mhm.
because people are afraid of, basically AI works best in CG. But when you're drawing 2D, remember, and I make this point in my book quite a bit, the ability of the person drawing to sell anything as long as you will buy it, as long as the audience will accept it, it can be as illogical and crazy and nonsensical as you want it to be. And that's part of the beauties of working in 2D. I
Mm.
always talk about Brad Bird's family dog design, where the eyes migrate across the head and the nose doesn't even stay connected. What AI program is going to find any logic in that? And yet
Mm.
it's a really fun character to watch. So I'm giving these long-winded answers to you, and I'm sorry about this,
It's
but
it's
that's
it's absolutely fascinating. I mean this
right.
the
You're right about today. We've been through it before, and that those two things still the same. Technology, not evil. Use,
Mm.
make decisions.
I think that's a good message for people for sure, and because it is the most talked about thing at the moment. And I would just say as well, anyone who's watching, this is a great opportunity. If you have questions for Bill, please feel free, type it in the chat. We'll hand them over to him for sure. There's some comments there just saying hi, and someone's called you Mr. 2.5D. I believe his title is Mr. In Between, guys. That's the name of his book. But I guess I know, I mean, you want to close the thread of this question, but I have a slight addendum to add to it. I think it's really important, and I'd be curious to get your opinion on this, Bill. Your career is so defined by that transitionary stuff, right? Whether it's artistic or technical or cultural changes that you kind of find yourself surrounded by all the time. And I'm just wondering, at the heart of that, how does that then shape your sense of creative identity as a director, right? As someone facing that, like that kind of single seed of creativity, how does that shape it? Does that make sense?
My creative foundation always rests in those 2 years in the Disney training program with Eric Larson
Mm,
as my mentor and everything, and the things I learned there about character and performance. And Eric was very big on staging and composition and everything, and purely filmic communication with the audience, a connection with the audience. That was always the dominating thing. And I would simply, basically, I tried to stay true to those principles, no matter what medium I was working with, or no matter what tools I was bringing into the arsenal. I've always been a preacher against what's called the seduction of technology, and that is,
mm,
I'm so fascinated with these wonderful tools that you completely forget that that's not what it's all about. And I see that happen so many times. I feel I see people, very talented people, get so caught up in the gimmicks and the techniques and the technology that the stuff they're producing is, what's underneath is not all that great, because they're just getting lost in the tech. And that's something
mm,
that I tried to never. I don't really. I don't think I even had to try to not do that. Maybe it's because I was so confronted with technology from the start that I always recognize it as being kind of like I don't want to say a bandage, but it was just something you put over the top. You don't want to
mm,
despise. You want a good foundation, and piling on a lot of tech will not do it. I tell a story in my book about this precisely. Very briefly, it's the old SIGGRAPH, the electronic theater, where these
mhm,
guys created a very simple animated bit of a little caterpillar trying to overcome some obstacles, and the audience was going crazy, except rooting for this little caterpillar. And then that was followed by a multi-million-dollar film using the latest computer technology that people practically fell asleep watching. You know, uh, and to me, that was like exactly what it's all about.
mm,
You don't buy entertainment with technology. It just doesn't happen.
mm,
That's one of the things that I also love about your book is that it's the perfect blend to me of you're describing technical knowledge, you're describing
mm,
personal experiences with the business side of the industry, which we'll get into later. But you've had there's a lot of characters who control the money in this business, and you talk about
mm,
them, and then also you talk about things like attending SIGGRAPH in the 80s, which I can't, my first time was in 94, right? So I missed that whole 80s period. Or you describe like TV production studios in the Philippines and in Taiwan, which are just completely foreign to our understanding of how animation is done, but they're essential to the process. But your book is just this perfect mix of storytelling that covers all these different and this is just I just want to talk about how good your book is here, but it's really fun to read, and I hope people read it for that reason, because I learned so much, just these little anecdotes that you had about
mm.
these different facets of the business. And that's not a question, but I just want to point that out. It's a lot. It's a lot of fun to read. Like the
Well,
SIGGRAPH stories and John Lasseter's pickiness about eggs and like stories that you can't find anywhere else. So
if there were two kind of themes that I sort of was following going through it, was I wanted it to be kind of relating the personal experience of what it was like to experience all this, not just not reading off inventions and reading off film titles, but what it was like to be
Mhm.
doing it, learning it, and making the mistakes and experiencing it. And then, there was also that aspect of the animation world that's like a civilization gone with the wind. I mean, that world I walked into in 1975 in Hollywood with all the old timers like Grim Natwick and Jim Foray and Willie Reitman and all, and Pris Freleng, and they were there, and we knew them. And the animation business hadn't changed since 1915. They were still, you could still sit at an animation desk and do exactly what they had done. I mean, it was an entire subculture that then went through almost like a World War II cataclysm of change and destruction.
Mm.
So I
Mm.
wanted people to get a little bit of a sense of what that old world was like and what the people were like and how things were, and then watch it kind of just change into what it is today. Yeah. Which I don't know what it is today. I know it's tough out there now. I'm not working anymore, as you know, but I know that the industry's going through some pretty big changes, and
Mm.
and I just thought it might be, like Cito always brings us up all the time how it's always ebb and flow, and hills and valleys and everything. So maybe there's a
Mm.
value in that to read how we went through a lot of that ourselves through these periods, and let's hope that it all comes back around. Do
Well, I
you,
think it's interesting because I don't know where people get this idea that a career is just a smooth upward incline. It is not that at all. It's a pendulum swing of total, I don't know what's going to happen next. Like your CV, when you present it to someone, you try to shape it to some degree to like as if you planned all this when it's just totally chaotic, sequences that have somehow linked together based on the doors that you've opened. And I think, taking the open door, which is kind of what you seem to do throughout your career, Bill, is just say, okay, let me just go through this door and I'll find out what's in there. Like you're talking about Tron jumping off the cliff and falling down, like you'd no idea where that's going to land. But you've been all over the world making this stuff as well, you know?
we sold our first TV show, and as you know, we were halfway into it, and then the toy company goes bankrupt, and they cancel the show. Who would ever think of that? You know,
Yeah,
or the
exactly.
time that these drug smugglers stole our Ferngully art. They hid drugs in our Ferngully boxes, and I mean, weird setbacks that everyone will tell you in the history of production. Expect catastrophe. Expect disappointment,
Mm.
crushing disappointment. You know, in many things. Yeah, but I guess in some ways my career was even more pronounced like that because unlike a lot of guys who kind of stayed in one place or had the benefit of enjoying a long
Mm.
time, I didn't. I kind of followed. I did follow the technology. I was so fascinated with
Mhm.
it that I went after it, and because of that, I had to go to all these different places and do all these different things. And I guess I do have a bit of a Zelig like, story of, like you say, experiencing different countries, different techniques, different
Mm.
people, different ways of doing things, and it was
Yeah.
a lot of fun. I was so blessed. I really wouldn't change a thing about it.
One of the things
Because you
is
found, sorry, Amit, I'll go first. No, I'm just taking this. Sorry.
no, please
But
continue.
it's like, it's, you, I think it's so colored because you find yourself at these key moments that seem to shape the kind of general arc of an industry story. You're just there, like Don Bluth and the Rat's Nest, stuff like that. Obviously, Tron is a good example, but even stuff with Ferngully, like seeing that as like you could see the end in sight with stuff like that, after pouring your heart into it. I think there's a great story where you just talk about crying in the car on the way home from a voice session, wasn't it? Just from sheer exhaustion of trying to get that through. I think that's what's, like Amit said, the book is so well presented. The chapters are so digestible, but it makes you want to like, oh my God, what else was he? And then you read the title of the next one, and you're just like, oh my gosh, what's going on next? It's so it's really really interesting. I don't think I've asked a question there. But good luck with all
We're
that
we're just
information.
we're just
Yeah.
throwing praise on the bill for this
Yeah.
book.
Yeah.
It's funny, like trying that I sometimes I think I almost blocked that out of the fact that I put it in the book because yeah, that was one of the real low moments, where there's a lot of
Yeah,
low
for
moments.
sure.
You look at your careers are full of that. I mean, and a lot of it
Mm,
is I think if you don't have failures, you're just not out there pushing things hard enough. Because if you play
mm,
it safe all the time, you're not going to have failures. But if you're out there trying to do things, you're gonna fail, and you have to almost now I don't know if embrace it is the right word. You certainly have to accept it, and
mm,
like they say, the right way to approach mistakes and failures is as a learning experience. You just look at it and say, okay, I've survived this. What did I learn from this? Maybe I'll be smarter next time. That's a good advice
mm.
for all young people to have, I think. And also it's the old thing
Yeah.
about it's the old thing about perseverance. But here's the thing that's so different in the world of animation, at least the world of animation that I grew up in. My generation loved animation. We just
Mm,
loved doing it. We would have done it for nothing, and that's why we were exploited so much. But when you look at guys, my contemporaries like Musker and Clements and Mike Gabriel and Mike Giamo and those guys, we just loved it. That's why we used to sit in the backyard in the grass and watch movies just to watch them over and over and over again and just talk about them all the time and
mm,
never took jobs for the money. We never sought, we didn't. We were just fanatically in love with animation.
mm,
And
mm.
in a way, you can't fail if that's your situation,
Yes.
because you're getting so much satisfaction from just doing the art and getting so much satisfaction from watching your scene on the screen and that you've done a good job, even if it's in a movie that's not as great. You
Mm,
know, it's such a magical thing to create life in an animated character. It's a god. I say in my book, I think it's the most godlike profession in the world, where you're literally having the ability to create a life that people will believe in and watch and care about on the screen, and you've made that out of nothing. I mean, how can you
mm,
not love doing that? And when you think of that reward, all these other things about success and failure and praise and publicity and fame, it's all, it's all pretty minor compared to the magical satisfaction you get from being able to, create a life.
Do you think though
mm.
the
It is.
success?
Oh yeah. Sorry, Amit. I've asked too many. You go.
No. I'll let you go right after. But I'm saying, do you think the success of what you and Musker and Brad Bird, what you created, has made it a more difficult industry though? Because you talk about, in the beginning of the book, you wanted to be an animator. You come out to California and you just knock on Chuck Jones's door, and it didn't lead to anything, but you could do that back then because there weren't as many people. Today you can't just go and go to Pixar and knock on Pete Docter's door and say and have Pete give you recommendations to everybody. There's hundreds of thousands of people who have come into the industry because of the success that you created during this second golden age. But do you think as a result too, I think it's gotten more business-like, the industry, because there's just so many people fighting for a space in the business. But would you agree that it was easier to come into the industry in the 70s if you were interested in animation than it is today, or do you think it's still possible to have that kind of passion and just jump into the field that you want to work in?
Well, those are in a way two different things. Absolutely, it was so much easier when we started. The industry was so much smaller, and remember, in the days of, and I make this point, the number of people who can animate in 2D by drawing is minuscule in the population. The number of people who can
Mm,
manipulate a computer object, it's 50 times more people can do that. So because of that, when we started, it was a smaller industry, easier to meet people just by sheer numbers. Now it's exploded because of CG. So many people can do it. The workforce is dramatically, astronomically larger, and of course, it is harder to do it. That part is true, but the second part of my point was the satisfaction of learning the art yourself and being able to create
mhm,
entertaining scenes. That remains a true thing, and in some ways, it's now become more accessible for more people to do that. And with YouTube and streaming, you can actually get to an audience, in a way you weren't able to do before, with us. And you can, that whole thing about, I make the point, one person can make a movie in animation. I use my example of Cordell Barker, who made Cat Came Back, but nowadays it's even more true. One person with a laptop at home can make a great looking little movie by themselves, and they can get it on the screen. So yes, the industry is much bigger, and you've lost things because of the massive increase in participation and competition. But the flip side is, if you're really interested in doing those creative things yourself and finding satisfaction and enjoyment in doing that, that still exists. That's still there. And you have to believe that the audience will find you. If you do something really good, it'll be found, it'll be seen, and it'll be recognized. But then you get back to that same thing I talked about earlier: is don't base your happiness on other people praising your work. you know, I
Right.
mean, base it on being satisfied that you're happy with what you've done. You know, who is
Mm.
it that I think Noel Coward? This is a famous thing. David Lean went to Noel Coward, and David Lean said to Noel Coward, how can I become a good director? And Noel Coward said to him, make movies the way you like, and if other people don't like them, get out of the business.
Mm.
So
Wow.
that's basically it. Follow your heart and make the movie you want to make and animate the stuff you want to do it. And if other people like it, that's a good thing. And if they don't, well, maybe you should think about doing something else.
I guess it's all a question of motivation as well.
Yeah.
Um, it's interesting, when you talk about earlier that idea of learning to love frustration, right? Getting used to that idea that you're always going to be in that space. Like when you're challenging yourself, it's not just suddenly you try something and you succeed. There's going to be in that huge in between gap of being really frustrated at not being able to do it. But that's where everything occurs. I remember Tom Moore said, it's one of my favorite quotes he ever said to me was, your style is a result of your limitations. So the only way to like actually develop yourself is to push against where your limitations are and always like evolve and change and just understand that it's a continuous ongoing process. That's what creativity is. That's what you're engaged with. But anyways, instead of me being selfish, we've got some questions in the comments here. From RT
Can I make
Zarin.
a
Hi.
follow-up comment I just said before we
Okay. Yeah,
start?
yeah.
I'm going to make this one comment, and that is that one trademark I found with all the people I know that I respect the most, that have done the best, is they were almost never ever satisfied with their work. They
Mm,
always felt it could be better. And it's ironic that the people with the most natural talent, like Brad Bird and Glenn Keane and James Baxter, they're the hardest working people.
yeah, for
They
sure.
can coast on this talent, and they're the hardest working people, constantly trying to get better, because and you've talked to them, they're never satisfied with what they do. And I find that to be a troubling thing with a lot of younger people, is they're super
Mm,
excited about the stuff they do that's not great. And even if you criticize them and you tell them, well, look, you're kind of missing this fundamental thing. Oh, I intended to do that. I mean, I don't know. I think that's the key to success, is be cautious about how great you are, because it's when the
yeah.
greatest people don't consider themselves great, maybe you should take a lesson from that.
It's I had a great I have a podcast called Animators Breakfast. We actually did an episode about Fern Gully, but I hadn't read your book at that stage. I wish I had, but I did. I had Chris Williams on, and he had directed things like The Sea Beast and Big Hero 6. He's one of the co-directors, but he said that the thing you're looking for, you're never going to get it. And you have to kind of get comfortable with that fact that, if you think you're hot shit, you're actually not hot shit. And, you want to stay clear of those kind of people. But anyways, to these comments, right? RT Zarin says, hi, did you print them on cells and continue the coloring process on them at that time? I'm not sure what film you're referring to here,
Tron,
RT.
probably.
Probably Tron. Yeah. Um,
It's
so did you
explained
put them on
deeply in the
cells?
book.
Oh, okay.
That,
Emid,
that-
Emid got
All the CG animation in Tron was all. Uh, it wasn't on cells. The CG, like the tanks and the recognizers and the sea of simulation, and all that solar sailor, that was all created digitally, and it was recorded directly on film from film recorders.
mm,
And then in Fern Gully, which was kind of, again, I always seem to fall into these symbolic moments. We were probably the last completely hand animated, hand painted feature film that ironically had 40,000 frames of CG animation blended into it. So we,
yeah.
again, like tech, but I was blending where I couldn't do this and I couldn't do that. I blended it, and we still use cells on it. It was, although we did have one of the first CG painted sequences. The baddie rap that was done by Sidley Road was one of the
Yeah.
first completely CG painted sequences. So I don't know if that answers your question. But.
Well, I'm sure he'll let us know. The second question we have here: do you have any tips on developing and understanding story structure? I don't know how much you want to get into that, but there you go.
I thought John Lasseter had the greatest quote ever about this. He said, "We're not artists. We're entertainers. And if the audience doesn't get it, we failed." So
Mm,
we're not putting up white squares on museum walls and charging $1 million for a white square, right? We're trying to communicate an idea of a character experience to the audience with enough clarity for the audience to, number one, understand what's going on, and number two, be emotionally moved by it. And so the simplest thing to start with whenever you're developing a story is simply asking yourself, who is this character, and why is anybody going to want to care about watching what's going on? It's the simplest thing. I find
mm,
this to be a real problem, even in a lot of live action filmmakers now who fall into the trap of being too obscure or too clever. We just can't tell what's going on. You just don't understand who the characters, and you're not believing them, and you don't believe the choices they make. And even when they do, you don't. Well, why do I care about this person or this character?
mm,
So I'd say the number one thing in story to think about is always test yourself with that. I used to have these four noble truths of story, and the first one was always, who is the character and what are they thinking? Because it's the thinking that's, if you don't understand who your character is and what they're going through at that moment, you're dead as a storyteller. So
mm.
just, man, start with that. And that whole thing about why would anyone other than my mother want to watch this show?
Good luck getting her to watch it. I mean, you'd truly watch it. Parents, yeah. But they're the questions in the chat anyway. So off you go, Mead.
well, I mean, one of the things about the book.
I don't see the chat anymore. Do I have a chat here in this?
No, you don't have it. We see it on YouTube where people are watching it live right now. So is that right?
Oh, I see. I do see some chat over there. Okay.
Yeah. One of the you explain why you have the title Mr. In Between, but it's also kind of a perspective on you're in between the technologies, but also I think another way that you're in between the industry is that you've always kind of straddled this line between independence and being a studio artist, which is very difficult to do. But you managed to set out on your own to start your own studio, and I think a big part of I don't know if you could say this is true, but I mean it seems like a big part of why you were able to go independent was that you had your wife Sue, who was also a key part of being able to run a studio together, which is I think it's always essential to have another partner, in a studio. But you had your wife, which is a lot of people say don't work with your spouse, but I was wondering, but you seem to have a very successful partnership with your wife, and I was wondering if you could just speak a little bit about if you're starting a studio, the challenges maybe of working with a spouse, or was it a natural? Did you guys just have a natural, rapport in terms of collaboration with each other? Like, how did you divide up the work between yourselves when you're running that studio?
Well, first of all, Sue and I, we've been blessed with a natural chemistry that from the first time we met, we just we like each other, we get along. And so as a starter, that made it easy to work with her. But the other thing that was a very lucky thing for me was that whole thing about filling gaps. The areas that I was not that great in, she was really great in. Specifically art direction and personnel. She was the most amazing recognizer of talent.
Wow.
She
Yeah.
basically hired all our key people because she had such a network. She just, everybody loves Sue, and she knows everybody in the business, and she was able to find these people, and she could walk by a student's desk, and like Ricky Nair, she could walk by his desk as a student, take one look, and go, "This guy's great," and she had the ability to do that. The way she plucked Steve Pilcher out of nowhere, out of Canada doing the children's book thing, and she saw that book and she brought him to Hollywood, and so she had this nonstop kind of ability to recognize strong talent and then recognize what worked for art and everything. And I should mention that maybe the entire theme of our entire discussion today, uh, she had kind of a role in the answer to that. When you're talking about the balance between computers and artwork, you're talking about the invasion of AI and the simple artist. The last scene in Technological Threat. And Technological Threat, of course, is the enduring metaphoric movie about the struggle between the artist and the invading technology.
More
That
relevant than
last
ever.
it's kind of amazing, isn't it? But that last scene where they're standing over the abyss, the cartoon guy and the computer guy, Sue said, "You got to knock the computer guy into the abyss." She says, "Art has to win. Art has to win." Because I originally thought, well, this is great. They're working together. They've defeated the boss. And she goes, no, no, no. That's not. Art must win. And so we knocked that guy into the abyss. And I think that that's kind of the message that we're sending to people today. Is that don't let the technology overwhelm you. Let the art let the art win. And that's kind of I just thought Sue reminds me of that all the time. That she says, "That was my scene. I did that."
So you had your conclusion to the film was workers versus management, and she changed it to art versus technology, and that, yeah, that's, that was a good
That's good.
decision. Well, one of
Yeah.
the things that struck me about that was that, I've that's an iconic animated short, and it's the in my mind it's like, your studio made the film, right? It's just what you make clear in the book is that you were really on the ropes during that moment. That was like a little bit of a last gasp for your ability to, be an independent company, and it becomes much more poignant when you realize that it was a risk that film was not just like a film that your studio made. It was a risk that you took by saying we're going to make a short with this remaining equipment that we have, and it's just it really, knowing the broad strokes of your career, but then reading the specifics of what you were going through while you were making these films is absolutely fascinating to me. That that you
I'm amazed sometimes that I'm sitting here retired and I'm able to, not work and still buy groceries because I never had any money through my whole career. I kept risking it all on stuff like that. Like, that tech threat, we spent every little penny we had. What were we thinking? We almost didn't even have to pay the rent or we just literally spent every last dime making that movie. And same thing with after Ferngully. I put all my profits of Ferngully back into the company trying to develop, new movies and do Arrow and everything. And we were just always bad business people just following the art. So I'm real happy that I have Social Security now. But, but anyway, it's true. Like the tech threat thing was, I guess that goes back to that being an artist. If you're an artist and you're doing it for the love of it, you're not being a calculating businessman, but you're a sucker and doing it because you believe in your art. that's how it falls, and sometimes it works out.
I'm also really glad you on your website. I should point out that people should go to the website. It's mrinbetween.org. But one of the most fascinating things to me that you put up was the teaser trailer for Arrow. I was in high school at an animation high school in the '90s, and I remember someone brought that in on videotape around 1996. They had a copy of it, and I hadn't seen it since 1996. But I remember that it was everyone was like, we were all, as teenagers then, we were like waiting for adult animation to happen, so that people like you were trying to do that at that stage. And then the whole story, I didn't know any of the background story behind that until I read your book about, how, it was through Joel Silver and everything. But you were also trying to, interested in pushing adult animation at a time when studios were just not really interested in doing that sort of work. But anyway, the trailer is on Bill's website, and it's very much worth taking a look at. I was happy to see that again after all these years.
It's never been available, so it's fun to see that. I think it's really too bad that Joel decided not to do it, but oh well. What are you going to do? Like, I roll the dice. So
But you were always experiment. I mean, you were always experimenting, and you were,
Mm.
trying to, kind of find new ways of using animation. And I think that was an exciting moment in animation history where, everyone was kind of like seeing the limitations of what the filmmaking was in animation, and there were all these new ideas that you were trying to push, and it maybe didn't happen at that moment, but I think it laid the groundwork for a lot of what's come since, certainly.
Mm.
So,
there's an old saying that says creativity thrives in limitation and dies in freedom. When
Mm.
you do something and you've only got X number of tools, or you have limitations on how it forces you to be creative and be innovative. And almost part of the frightening thing now is you can do almost anything with technology. It's you can
Mm.
use so many. You can use image processing and rotoscope and automate. And now AI is providing ways to render and do painting, and almost anything is almost instantly available to you. So it. Yeah, I wonder if that doesn't make it almost harder to come up with something original and new, because you know the tools are so easy to access. You're not really fighting those
Mm.
challenges.
It's just to shift gears slightly. When you talk about being retired, I think you're so generous with your knowledge and stories and everything, Bill. That's so clear in the book, right? But it's clear, when you talk about your students and the kind of how you bring them around, you take them to academy events and stuff like that. You kind of really take people in through the industry hugely. And even when you were in India, you were out there training people as well. And I'm just so curious what you're up to now. What's Bill's life look like day to day now? Are you still working with students, or?
A little bit. I've retired to Wisconsin here. And I
Oh,
really
okay.
enjoy it. And I will occasionally give talks and lectures to the local colleges, and I just
Mhm.
was a speaker at DePaul University in Chicago, and gave seminars down there. So I do it occasionally. I'm not as active as I was, although I'm still in
Mm.
the academy, of course, and I'm still in the executive committee of the animation branch. So I'm on the rules committee and dealing with AI there, and the new definitions of animation, which, believe me, are very interesting to try to
Mm.
define. You know, uh, you there's always that thing with the academy about drawing the distinction between what, no matter how you feel about it, technically qualifies as animation, and then what you recognize and reward as being really great animation. And that's
Mm.
been one of the key discussion points of the whole AI situation and these new tools that are coming in. So anyway, that's my main involvement. I'm here back in Wisconsin. I'm involved in some nonprofits. I'm actually showing Ferngully next Saturday as a
Hey,
benefit for
no way.
a nonprofit that I work with, and I'm giving a lecture about Ferngully, and you know, uh, so that's it. But I'm kind of happily retired. I have to say, I'm kind of, I don't miss the business part of the business at all, because it's pretty tough to function at in that environment. And it's nice after all these years to have a little bit of peace and quiet,
Well, I can't imagine anyone who can retire in peace quite so peacefully as you, having ticked all these boxes throughout your life. There's so many. I don't think you missed anything, if that makes sense. I'm not sure, or nothing
Oh,
missed
I'll tell
you,
you what I
rather.
miss. What I miss is the people. I miss,
Uh, yeah.
I that's the one thing I miss about the West Coast is just the many, many, many wonderful
Mm,
friends that we built up over the decades who we're still in touch with and we Zoom with and we go back and we visit. But, you know, at the end of the day, I think I say it in the book, that the greatest thing out of the whole career was the people we worked with and the friends we made. And
mm,
I'm so pleased and happy to say that we have so many friends we're still close to. And Fern Gully is like the only movie that has reunions. We have reunions and practically everybody who worked on it shows up wearing their Fern Gully jackets. I mean, not many films have that. And I'm very
mm.
proud that they're always saying that it was the best experience of their lives is working on that movie with us. So,
Hey.
I think that to me, that's the most special thing was just befriending and getting to know and work with these absolutely wonderful, talented, generous, bright, funny people. That's man, I tell you,
Mm,
that's the greatest thing about the animation community. So
mm.
Yeah, one of the we have a couple more questions or comments and questions. The one person writes, "I remember I watched Technological Threat on TV when I was a kid in the early '90s, and it was my favorite animated short film. So it certainly made an impact on some people."
wow, that's good. Thank you very much.
And someone else says, about 20 years ago when I was very young, I saw your work on a VHS tape along with other festival animation. I was amazed by the 3D with a 2D look. And I guess you were the same person who worked with Disney. That's true. He says, I was in Iran finding rare animation was very hard. So this person was
Wow.
in Iran and they saw Technological Threat. 20. It's the impact that you make with these films that you don't realize that, you know,
Mm.
people around the world are being inspired by this work. So thank you for that comment.
Yeah,
Um,
it's wonderful to hear that. It's great to hear that and like you say, it's ironically, it's still so relevant today. The central message of this struggle between the art and the technology. So,
and one more
We've got
comment.
some more. Yeah, more flying in. You go, Amit. Go for
Go
it.
ahead, go ahead, Cole. You can read it.
All right, I'll read it in my silky voice. Hi, Bill. No, I was a big fan of Technological Threat back in the day. Kept a VHS catalog of animations recorded mostly on Channel 4 in the UK. Channel 4 were great for that stuff, to be honest. Such a great mixture of styles and techniques, messaging that's still relevant today, and such a wide spectrum of emotions: confidence, stress, humor, threat, backstabbing. That's a good one.
all the things you experience in the world of animation. That's right. Well, and yeah, Tech Threat in so many ways embodied so many different things. And getting back to that friendship thing I told you about, the people that it wouldn't exist without Bailey and Rob Minkoff and Brad
Mm,
Bird and all these folks chipping in for nothing and helping me on that movie, animating scenes for free. And then Rich Moore, right out of Cal Arts, basically designing the movie and doing all the backgrounds and everything. I mean,
mm,
we pitched in, and that was not unusual. We were all helping each other like that at the time, and that's why the community is, like I say, and when it was, I guess when it was smaller, it was almost easier to have a community, but nevertheless, you can still have your circle of friends that no matter how big the business
mm,
gets. And like Tom Cito always has this great thought where he tells his students, um, these people around you, your contemporaries, are the ones you're going to stay with the rest of your life, because they're going to follow you up through the industry, and they're going to recommend you for jobs. And when you lose your job, they're going to help you out. And, that's why you stay close to, the people in your own kind of like, your own group, because husbands and wives come and go, but your animation contemporary, your animation contemporaries stay.
No, it's truly amazing how many people that pass through Kroyer Films have gone on to become key figures in the industry, either as directors or art directors. It's the level of people who pass through. It's absolutely fascinating to read that in the book.
Yeah, Vicki Jensen just directing her movie, just came out this year from Skydance and everything, and she was such an important part of our company and everything. It's so great to see her still excelling this many years later. She's still doing such great things. It's just amazing.
Well, Bill,
I don't
thank
know
you.
if you're probably aware of that auction going on right now, the Animate auction.
Oh yes,
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's some Fern Gully stuff in there, and some Tech Threat cells coming up too. So
Oh
if
really?
people want
Wow.
to,
Hey.
if they like Tech Threat and they want to help the people in LA that have lost their homes, you can bid on those Tech Threat cells.
Are those available right now in the auction?
Yeah, they're there. They're apparently every day Sotheby's puts more of them up, and I know I checked it this morning. They weren't up yet, but they're going to be there. And believe me, there aren't a lot of Tech Threat cells out there because I never let a lot of them go. So
Do you still
but
have
they're.
all the artwork for the film? Did
I
you
have
keep all
I have
the
a
art?
well, I have a reasonable amount of it. Over the years things go away, but there weren't that many cells in Tech Threat. I mean, it's a short film, and you know, but I have, but anyway, so it's nice, and they look nice because they're hand painted and they're fun to see. So, you can look
Are
for them at that side auction, and we
are
got some fun up there too.
just out of curiosity for Kroyer Films, like your archives, like your documents and the art that you've kept from that, do you plan to donate those to or have they been donated already to the Academy or somewhere, or do you plan to do
They're
anything with
earmarked
those?
for that. Anything I have is kind of earmarked for the Kennedy. I am in discussions about possibly doing an Art of Fern Gully book, even though it's many years afterward.
Wow, that would
There
be.
was a bit of time, and there was so much great stuff in there. And Ralph Eggleston's work was beyond compare. First
Yeah.
film was production designer, and his work as pastels and are just absolutely phenomenal. I would like to share those, with people. So, that's a possibility. If there's interest in it, I think I may, it's a
That'd
lot
be
of
a great
work,
idea.
which
Yeah.
I'm pretty
Because you've
lazy
got the
now.
color scripts and everything, don't you, for that? Just color scripts and yeah.
You basically brought that back, if you remember, like nobody
Yeah.
was doing them.
Mhm.
Ralph was such a fan of William Cameron Menzies, and he knew all about that. And he did those color scripts for us. And since then, they become kind of the thing to do in animation. Almost every film has them. He did them on all his Pixar films, and I think it was cemented, but I have all those color scripts from Fern Gully, and they're just really fun to see. Fern Gully was a sad thing because they took most of our art away. The company that owned the film came and they trucked all the art to an art consignment place, and it's one of the great tragedies of my life is that it was in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and then these guys went out of business, and some trucks came and took the art away. No one knows where it is or whatever happened to it.
Wow.
I think one of the great tragedies in the history of animation was we had 16,000 pounds of art, all the cells, all the drawings, and I managed to, of course, accidentally keep some of it,
Well,
but
it's a good thing you did.
most of it went to this consignment house, and I've been trying to figure out, you know, if anybody can ever figure out what happened to it. And if I do, that'll be a great story. But
Do you think it still exists? Do you think it's been destroyed
I would
or
I would like to think that nobody would be callous enough to actually destroy it. I like to think that it somehow got some bankruptcy attorney or something stuck it in a locker somewhere, So you never know, things like that happen, and you just never know. But
Well, if you're watching this, any bankrupt lawyers, let us
you
know.
live in Cedar Rapids, let me know if you heard me.
Well, Bill,
Why
thank you.
Cedar Rapids? Okay, well, we're wrapping up.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off.
I was going to say, why I asked them at the time, why Cedar Rapids? And they said, well, because we have 25 employees, and among the 25 employees, we have 17 fluent languages. So we sell art, we can sign art all over the world, and because that's why we're here, because we have hire these college graduates for very little money, and that was the reason they were in Cedar Rapids. So anyway, that was that.
Well, Bill, thank you so much for joining us. There's so much more we could have talked about, like, all the titles that you did, and Pitfall, and I wanted to get more into rhythm and hues. There's your career is just absolutely packed with interesting events. I highly recommend the book, Mr. In Between. It's a fantastic read. It's fun and breezy and very informative. So if you're watching this, absolutely pick up a copy of the book. And I hope we have the chance to speak more in the future as well. So Bill, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's great. I feel like once you're on Cartoon Brew, you're legitimate.
Great. Well,
We've made it, guys.
Guys,
We've made it, guys.
We're gonna use that on our media kit now.
Alrighty.
Thank you so much, Bill. And that's it for the live stream today. So we'll see you guys in a couple weeks.
Thanks so much, guys. Thank you.